Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Key Wash Process Kenya from Jacu. And there's the container right there. And Jacu, based out of Ålesund, Norway. And this is part 19 of our 24-part KaffeBox Advent Calendar series, and the 5th coffee from Jacu that has appeared on this channel. And that is because they have appeared in the previous 2 KaffeBox Advent calendars. And it's been an interesting mix of coffees that they've included up to this point, as all but one of them have been a non-wash processed coffee. And the one wash processed coffee that they did include was a Panamanian Geisha. So in a way, this actually feels like my first time trying one of their more standard offerings. And again, the way that this works, the notes and tasting are made with the V60. This cup right here is made with the Chemex, and I was able to find a brew guide for Jacu, which translated to a 15.5 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 93 degrees Celsius. Now, in terms of roast profile for this coffee, again, most of these coffees are light by most metrics and standards. This one, however, felt like it had a little bit more development than a lot of the other Kenyan coffees we've reviewed to this point. With that being said, they've been some really light Kenyan coffees. This one's just a little less light than all of those. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. First impression, and the first big takeaway I had from this coffee was when I actually opened the container to try to guess what this coffee was. I immediately picked up on this herbal quality to it, and I kind of deduced that we had already tried all of the Coffea Circular coffees in the Advent calendar, so I just kind of assumed that maybe it was something along the lines of a Kenyan coffee. And that assessment was correct, as not only was it present in the aroma from the container itself, but it was present in the brew as well. The cup does lean heavily into the more tart and berry side of fruits from the first impression. However, it's not necessarily on the most acidic side of things, as that part of the coffee felt somewhat subdued. And that's what I'm kind of hinting at in terms of the roast profile, because this one, while still light, didn't have the overly bright acidic qualities that some of the other Kenyans we've reviewed to this point had. The cup does provide an above average clarity as well, which is a really positive selling point to me on Kenyan coffees, as that's oftentimes a sticking point for me with these coffees. It does also focus more on the candied side of things as opposed to the savory side of things. So in terms of Kenyan coffees for me, candied is good, savory, acidic tomato, bad. So for that reason, I was already enjoying this coffee more than a bunch of the other Kenyans we'd had. Tart red berries, candied lemon feel like the most dominant components in the cup, while there's an almost minty-like quality to the cup. And that's kind of what I was picking at when I first opened this container, was there's this slight sort of herbal mintiness to it. And I found that present in the cup itself to complement the red florality. So again, herbal red florality, and oftentimes when I see rosehip and hibiscus listed on there, I hate to say it, but to me they're somewhat interchangeable, as I maybe don't know enough about flowers, but regardless, they have this kind of more herbal red floral components to them. That was definitely present in the coffee. This coffee has been really consistent with both brew methods, as it was really good in the V60. It's equally as good as the Chemex, but I wouldn't necessarily say that there's too much to differentiate between the two, mostly because the cup was coming out clean in the V60, and that's typically the biggest difference I'll notice. So we will go ahead and put up that tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. Right, and we have a bunch of level 4s, so we will go through those, starting with the body level 4. That's something I really should have noted as a difference between these 2 brew methods, as maybe there's a slight bit more clarity in the Chemex, but there's definitely less body, as I couldn't help but put it all the way up there at that level 4 in the V60. Felt very textured, and I really appreciated the texture in the coffee from that brew method. That being said, the Chemex definitely lighter. I would actually even push that on the lower side of the 3 through the Chemex. However, the clarity is great. I really appreciate the clarity. One of the cleanest standard washed Kenyan coffees I've had in quite a while. So for that reason, the cleanliness definitely justified at the level 4 through the V60, but even more justified through the Chemex in the cleanliness category. Finish, level 4. Yes, I've always said that it's going to be almost impossible for a Kenyan coffee not to have at least a level 4 in terms of the finish. But in this case, it's a little bit more of those bright berries as opposed to the bright acidity within the coffee itself. Actually, I should say bright citrus as opposed to the bright acidity. Nonetheless, it actually is very much in line with that level 4 mark. Florality, level 4. Yes, somewhat slightly less subdued in the Chemex, as there's not quite as much of that herbal red floral component in the coffee. With that being said, it was quite distinct, quite noticeable through the V60, so I still like it there at that mark for when we made it. Berry fruit, Level 4, yes, it's a little bit more of a tart, bitter red berry component to the coffee. That's also why the citrus reached that level 4 mark. Initially, when I made this tasting wheel, I had to go back and change it because right at the forefront, it was much more on the berry side of things. But as the coffee cooled down, I was definitely able to pick up a lot more of that candied lemon attribute in this coffee. So I bumped that up to the 4, and I really like having both of those at a 4. It felt like it was worth making the change in the tasting wheel. Savoriness, level 3, I definitely don't agree with that in the Chemex. I would bump that all the way down to level 2. This isn't an overly tomatoey coffee, which is a huge selling point to me. And with the V60, I would actually say that I don't know if I would bump that all the way up to a 3. It's, if anything, on the lower side of the 3, but it's probably more of a 2 regardless. So I'm going to kind of disagree with myself on that part of the tasting wheel. The bitterness though, level 3, that's another one that I adjusted, and it's again because the bitterness is coming from the berries as well as the lemon. And I don't mind it being overly bitter, but that's mostly because the acidity is there at that level 3 mark. So that part works fine for me. Again, not necessarily the most acidic cup of coffee. I'm not the biggest fan of acidity in coffee. Sometimes it's needed, but in this case, having the focus be a little bit more on the candied side of things was a nice positive for me. And that kind of lends itself towards the last thing, and perhaps the most important thing to discuss, which is the sweetness still being at that level 3 mark. That was a really hard one to put there at that level 3 because even though it was, I would say, slightly sweeter than I typically experience from a lot of Kenyan coffees, it still focused a little bit more on the bitter side of things, the bitter side of the berries and the citrus fruit. So for that reason, I just couldn't bump it all the way up there. However, I would still say this is on the higher side of the level 3, a little bit more sweetness than acidity in this cup, which is all I kind of ask for when it comes to Kenyan coffees. So yeah, that's kind of the way that this tasting wheel worked out. I think it's pretty nice for both brew methods, which just 1 or 2 changes here and there. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I really like this one. This is actually one of my favorite standard wash processed Kenyan coffees in the entire Advent calendar. I would actually say it's actually been one of my favorite coffees in general from the Advent calendar up to this point, as I think Jacu did a really nice job. And I've been wondering for a very long time, given that I hadn't liked any of the previous 4 coffees I'd had from them. The Panamanian Geisha I was slightly underwhelmed by, but this coffee right here I feel like is the best of what I think that they're capable of doing. I think that this one was really well done, as it was my type of Kenyan, definitely skewed a lot more on the sweeter candied side of things as opposed to the acidic tomatoey side of things. So for that reason, this one was a winner for me. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, very much in line with the same type of Kenyan drinker that I am. If you like these slightly more sweet, slightly more berry focused, and while it still does have a little bit more of those tart, bitter aspects to the coffee, it has significantly less of the acidity and some significantly less of the savoriness. And I know that there are some Kenyan drinkers that really like those things from their coffees as opposed to the very strong acidity in the coffee. So that's kind of the direction I would point someone towards in this coffee. In addition to that, it did have some nice herbal aspects, some nice floral aspects, and as a result, there was a little bit more depth in this coffee for me than sometimes I experience from the more one-note, one-directional Kenyan coffees. I think I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Key Wash Processed Kenya from Jacu. Thank you for watching.